Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think my afternoon cup of coffee is kicking in, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So, Dimitri, if you'll go ahead and start recording here, we will get started.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Redd. I'm with Providence Engineering, aka Providence Oris, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our series of webinars that we've presented. This one is a little different. We're not talking about any new techniques or enhancements to our BEAST software, but did want to kind of give a quick and dirty overview of what came about at the EPA's 11th Conference on Air Quality Models, which was held earlier this month, actually, I think on the 12th and 13th. So today, what I want to do for the next 15 or 20 minutes is give you kind of a background of these EPA modeling conferences, spend a substantial amount of time talking about the proposals that EPA has opened up for Appendix W, the guideline air quality models, and then talk about some of the updates with the latest versions of AirMod, AirMet, and AirScreen. So, as you probably all know, EPA's primary modeling guidance document, the guideline air quality model, also nowadays known as Appendix W to 40 CFR 51. And because it is a part of the federal regulations now, when EPA wants to update it, they've got to go through the rulemaking process of the good old Administrative Procedures Act, which includes notice and comment for the proposals. So for this proposed change or update to Appendix W, EPA published the formal notice in the Federal Register back on July 29th, which started a 90-day comment period. And that comment period will be closing on October 27th. And it'll get here quicker than we know it, actually. In terms of why EPA has to do this, there's actually some language in Section 320 of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1997 that states that basically EPA must hold a conference related to air quality models and modeling every 3 years. To with it, it's the actual language from the Act. It basically says have a hearing every 3 years, and interested persons can submit written comments, and a transcript will be provided from the hearing. So the 11th Modeling Conference served as the hearing, if you will, for this proposed revision to Appendix W. Now, previously, in March of 2012, we had the 10th Modeling Conference, and there was really nothing new, nothing earth-shattering that was adopted. But in the course of it, EPA did commit to making some proposals that they would then come back and revisit as part of the 11th Modeling Conference, which, in fact, they did. Now, in terms of the last time Appendix W was updated, that was in November of 2005, 10 years ago. And that was when AirMod was designated as the new preferred air quality model. So in 10 years, a lot of things have happened. And certainly I would think that it's well past time to update Appendix W. We have new 1R NO2 and 1R SO2 NAQS. They weren't there in 2005. And there have been more modeling tools that have sort of been evolving in that time frame as well. So time-wise, this actually turns out to be quite fortunate. So in the Appendix W proposal that EPA did, it basically comes down to three components. One is they note that they were reorganizing the guideline. I believe the word they'd like to use is streamline it. Consolidate some language, take some stuff out that's not pertinent anymore, and so forth. So, and some of that was certainly cosmetic or editorial in nature, but because of some of the changes that are being proposed, there actually are new sections or actually new chapters that are being put in. Along with that, EPA will be incorporating the new guidance that is proposed here, the new modeling techniques, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then there was the discussion of the updates or upgrades to AirMod, AirMet, and AirScreen. Now, when we start talking about the new guidance and new techniques, maybe one of the first things that kind of catches your eye is the fact that EPA is making changes to the what are called Appendix A or preferred models list. These are those models that EPA has tested versus monitoring data and said that, yes, these types of models are applicable or appropriate in the given situation. So the one thing that they did was remove the CalLine 3 family of models out of there and proposed to replace them with AirMod. CalLine, Cal3QHC, Cal3QHDR are line source models that get used in things like intersection modeling. They are, I guess you might say, old school Pascal-Gifford type dispersion schemes. AirMod, much more modern, and in fact also has a line source algorithm. So in EPA's estimation, it says, why have two models, especially if one is kind of outdated? So they're proposing to replace the CalLine series with AirMod. So it's pretty straightforward. They also proposed to remove the BLP model, buoyant line and point, which if you've ever done work modeling an aluminum facility, aluminum reduction facility, you probably had to use BLP. And the reason why they're removing BLP is because they are incorporating the buoyant line algorithm into AirMod. So again, now you have no need for redundant models. So in the future with AirMod, with the buoyant line algorithm, you should be able to do the same things with it that you would do with BLP. And then finally on this changes list, EPA proposes to remove CalPUF as the preferred or recommended long-range transport model, which is an interesting development, I guess, to say the least. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a few more slides. One other thing, or another thing I should say, that's come up in regard to new guidance and techniques has to do with how we do our NO2 modeling. So as you know, we have the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 approaches. By the way, if somebody just joined and has not muted their phone, if you could do so, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1, assuming that all NOx is NO2. Currently, we have Tier 2 as being the ambient ratio method, and EPA is proposing in this Appendix W rewrite to replace ARM with ARM2, which is a different technique, but still looks at ratios of NO2 to NOx. Now, we also have the Tier 3 screening tools, ozone limiting method and plume volume molar ratio method, or OLM and PVMRM. And at this point, if you wanted to use those, you had to go the route of it assumed to be an alternative technique, meaning you'd have to get approval from the regional office. Well, EPA is now saying that no, these screening tools should become regulatory just like ARM2. And bear in mind, I should also point out, Tier 2 and Tier 3 are still considered, if not just regulatory, but screening techniques, meaning that if you use them, you should get a conservative answer vis-a-vis what reality is. The other thing as far as PVMRM is that EPA wants to replace the current version with something called PVMRM2. And PVMRM2 will have a change in how the dispersion coefficients are used to define the plume volume. And that is what are called relative coefficients or relative sigmas will be used in PVMRM2 during convective conditions, and at nighttime in stable conditions they will revert back to the total dispersion coefficients. And the new version of AirMod that is out, 15181, does include both. PVMRM will eventually go away, but for right now, EPA is including them both in AirMod 15181 for folks to do some testing and comparisons and so forth. One of the things that comes up that is mentioned as far as Tier 3, as you know, when you're running AirMod with either OLM or PVMRM, one of the inputs is the in-stack ratio, how much of the total NOx is actually NO2 as it exits the stack. And as you probably remember, the default EPA said should be 0.5 or half of the NOx is NO2. But what they now say is that for distant background sources, which there's some language that says that this is somewhere between more than 1 to 3 kilometers away from the source under consideration, you can actually drop that ratio from 0.5 to 0.2. So let's see how that turns out for future projects. Meteorological data is also one of the issues that's been discussed or opened up, if you will. And one of them is kind of not really all that surprising, and that is just that EPA formalizes or memorializes, whatever phrase you want to use, their March 8th, 2013 memo that basically said you had to use ASOS data and airmet it when you're processing met data. So we've been doing that for a couple of years. This just more or less sets it in stone, stone being Appendix W, I guess. The other thing as far as met data is that EPA is now saying that when you have instances where there's not a representative National Weather Service station close enough to your source or that could be used for your source, or if it's not possible or practical or cost prohibitive to site an on-site tower, you can now make use of EPA's Mesoscale Model Interface, or MMIF tool, which basically goes into a prognostic met model like the Weather Research and Forecasting Model, WRF, and takes the predictive data and puts it into basically an ISHD form or data format that you can then process through AirMet. And they have also, in fact, released some guidance on how to use MMIF. Interestingly enough, one of the things that EPA does say in the guidance is that if you are using MMIF, you only have to use, or you at least, depending on how you look at it, 3 years of data. And remember, when we typically do PSD permitting with Weather Service data, we're using 5 years. So I'm not sure why there's a disconnect there, but then nevertheless, that's the guidance that's been proposed. Now, another item here that I think is also raised a lot of eyebrows has to do with how do we address single source impacts of ozone and secondary PM 2.5 in the context of, say, a PSD permit. And what had previously happened was the EPA was petitioned by the Sierra Club then their petition basically said, EPA, you need to be having PSD permit applicants evaluate these secondary formed pollutants in the atmosphere. And EPA in January 2012 said, yeah, you're right, we really do need to do that. And at the 10th modeling conference in March of 2012, they sort of officially said, yes, we're working on that right now, and we should have something available for review and comment by the 11th the 11th modeling conference. So that's kind of the backstory on it. With that, they are actually putting in a new Chapter 5 in Appendix W, and they're coming up with what they call a two-tiered approach. And there's also some draft guidance, again, for you to review, shown at that link right there. Now, I mentioned we have the two tiers. We have I guess prior to the two tiers, a new maybe get-out-of-jail-free card that's popped up. And, of course, like everything else, we have a new acronym to learn, the MERP, or Modeled Emission Rate for Precursors. And it's just this initial tool. And EPA says that a MERP is some emission rate that's going to be greater than, let's say, the secondary PM2.5 significant emission rate of 40 tons per year, either NOx or SO2. But the MERP is assumed by EPA to be a level below which you would not expect to see significant amounts of secondarily formed PM2.5. And we're going to have a MERP for ozone precursors, which is NOx and VOC, as well. So if you think back to the PM2.5 permit modeling guidance that basically said if you were above 40 tons for NOx or SO2 and you had to do some kind of analysis, EPA has realized that anything below, 40 tons is still not going to create any significant secondarily formed PM or ozone. So we're going to have these new MERPs. What those levels are, I don't know. They were not part of the proposal, so I'm assuming that there's going to be some kind of follow-up guidance or rulemaking that will give us an idea. It may be guidance memos, I don't know, but it looks to be something that will make our lives a little easier, but we'll just have to wait and see what those levels end up being. And as I just said, that these MERPs were not quantified or identified in the proposal, so we'll have to wait a little while. If you can't fall out being under the MERP, then you start the either Tier 1 or Tier 2 analyses. So Tier 1 you can think of as being the PM 2.5 permit modeling guidance's qualitative approach or hybrid qualitative-quantitative approach, where you may do some kind of a holistic analysis, maybe look at pollutant offset ratios and modeling those. There's a whole laundry list of those in the the PM 2.5 permit modeling guidance. If you can't accurately or adequately demonstrate that your impacts are acceptable, then you may have to go to Tier 2. And now you're talking about real modeling with real models like maybe a Lagrangian puff model with chemistry, or even, heaven forbid, a photochemical grid model. But EPA sort of assured us at the conference that they don't expect to see very many cases where somebody actually has to go to the trouble of doing that kind of detailed modeling. I certainly hope that's the case. Now, I mentioned earlier with regard to long-range transport modeling that EPA was proposing to pull CalPuff as the preferred Appendix A model when you're looking at beyond 50 kilometers, maybe in terms of Class 1 area impacts. But they still say that you may be able to use it as a screening tool like you might use other screening tools. interestingly enough, part of the reason that EPA wanted to pull CalPUF off of Appendix A had to do with who owned or managed the CalPUF code, which, as near as I can tell, it's only changed hands a couple of times in the last 10 or 15 years, but that is still, I guess, problematic for EPA. Anyhow, one thing that has grown out of this that made a lot of people happy was that EPA is now saying that if you're doing your near-field modeling with AirMod, that should be sufficient to address NAAQS impacts, the old cause or contribute. So they don't think you need to worry about long-range transport out beyond 50 kilometers. Yay. But they also, in the next sentence, say you may still have to worry about that, again, with something like CalPUF for Class 1 increment consumption. So on the sort of the downhill slide here for the changes to the Appendix W proposal, chapters 8 and 9 of the proposal have to do with basically the how-to part of modeling. And one thing that, again, opened some eyes, made some people very happy, is that EPA seems to be saying now that you can use actual emissions for background sources when you're doing cumulative NAAQS modeling. You know, we've had that flexibility or that ability to do that for PSD increment actual emissions, but now they're saying that we can use it for NAAQS modeling as well. The definition, and there's actually, I think it's table 8-1 or 8-2 that goes through and describes how to put those together. And it does have to be actual emissions based upon the most recent 2 years of operation. I don't think you're allowed to pick and choose. In Section 8.3 of the proposed version of Appendix W, there's more language on how to develop a background, not necessarily inventory, but ambient monitored background data. As you know, with AirMod, you can put in background data by sectors. So anyway, EPA has added some more prescriptive language within the new version of the Appendix W. So that was the changes in the guidance, if you will. Now to kind of finish this, I'm going to talk about some of the changes in the models themselves. So the first bullet there, some current beta options to become regulatory. I think we'll be very happy with this. The first thing I wanted to mention is there's a new low wind option within AirMod called low wind 3, which is sort of a combination of low wind 1 and low wind 2. It increases the minimum value of sigma V from 0.2 to 0.3, as in low wind 2, but takes out the upwind dispersion, which is part of low wind 1. And so with that, EPA says we think low wind 3 should be a regulatory option within AirMod, but we'll leave low wind 1 and low wind 2 in there just for testing purposes. Within AirMet, if you process the met data, you know that there's a switch you can throw for what's called adjust U-star, the surface friction velocity. And I know some people have asked the EPA previously can I use the adjust U-star, and you had to really make a good argument to EPA to do that. Well, now EPA is now saying that if you're processing met data through AirMet, that yes, you can use adjust U-star because it will now be a regulatory option. So between low wind 3 and adjust U-star, this is supposed to address some of the model over prediction issues when you're looking at stable nighttime low wind speed conditions. And as part of the presentation package that EPA put out, they actually did show that they had compared these options versus 3 field studies, although I think they actually did it with the previous version of AirMod, not 15181. Not that that matters all that much. We also heard that EPA will be releasing a new version of AirMinute sometime in October, but they would not say or did not say what exactly would be in that new version. Also, for those of you that may be wondering, there was also nothing said about changes or updates to air surface. So at least for right now, we are still dealing with air surface with the 1992 land cover data. Other changes as far as beta options that are now regulatory are two techniques for characterizing capped stacks and horizontal stacks are being proposed as regulatory options, meaning that you don't have to go get special permission to use those in a modeling study. And because, as I said before, BLP's buoyant line algorithm is being pulled into AirMod, they are taking BLP out of Appendix A. So we now have the buoyant line algorithm within AirMod. However, there was actually some questions raised about whether the version of buoyant line source in AirMod is going to give you the same results as the BLP model. There are obviously some differences between the two model constructs, and if they don't get the same numbers, did EPA actually evaluate this versus any ambient data? And I don't know the answer to that. And I will also mention, just off to the side here, the new version of BEAST that just came out about a week ago does run AirMod 15181. However, it does not include the buoyant line data inputs in there. We are working to put those in there. That will be coming out in BEAST 11.02, which should be out fairly soon as well. Air screen. Well, as you also remember, there was another EPA memo a while back that formally said, don't use Screen 3 anymore, use air screen. And so in the Appendix W proposal, EPA just sort of formally lists or memorializes air screen as being the preferred screening model or screening version of AirMod. There is a new version of air screen that now includes the inversion breakup fumigation algorithm and the coastal fumigation algorithm that were in Screen 3. EPA also changed the MakeMet processor that's part of the air screen package so that it can include the adjust U-star routine from AirMed, but you actually have to run that outside of air screen. So with all that said, and it was very encouraging, I'll grant you, it was very encouraging. We don't have time frame for EPA redoing or reproposing those vacated PM 2.5 sills. Those were not mentioned at all, and hopefully they will come up soon. Nor was there a time frame established for it coming up with an ozone sill. The MERP levels, as I said earlier, were not defined. So there's still some missing pieces here, but overall, I think we're going to be happy with these changes that our EPA is proposing. So again, if you get the opportunity, read through the proposed rules, the fact sheet, the proposals, not just put up by EPA, because that's all I'm talking about today, but also look at the proposals that were done by regulated community and other consultants, because there's obviously quite a bit of work that has been gone into to that as well. So if you want to do that, these are the links that are probably of most use. There's actually a page for the 11th Modeling Conference. Within it is the link to the Federal Register notice that has the proposed rule, the proposed Appendix W, and then there's another link that has all of the conference presentations. Now, again, not just EPA's, but the audience's presentations as well. So I would say with all that, I think that concludes my talk, and we can go ahead and I guess, Dimitri, stop the recording and let's open it up to questions. Please don't tell me I put you all to sleep.